So the first speaker is going to be Nick Wogan, who's a graduate student in the Earth and Space Science Department, the astrobiology program. And he's going to talk about a research rotation he did for 3 months, I guess, at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And then our second speaker is Rory Barnes. Oh, there he is. We've done a runner. He's going to talk about computational habitability and the suite of work that's going on regarding that. So, Nick, take it away.
Okie dokie. Yeah, hello everybody. I did my research rotation at NASA Goddard in the DC area. My presentation here is called Detecting Exo-Earth Candidates with Next Generation Direct Imaging Space Telescopes. So I did this project with a couple different mentors. So Sean Domingal-Goldman, Akira Berge, Chris Stark, and then I was also mentored by Ty Robinson and Eric Wolf. So we actually never saw each other in person. We just emailed and Slack messaged a bunch, and they were very helpful. So we're going to jump straight in with some background. So many of you have probably heard of the 2020 Decadal Survey on Astronomy and Astrophysics. It's a survey where some people get together and they decide what NASA should spend money on in the coming decades. And this survey came out about a year ago, and it recommended that NASA construct a space telescope capable of observing the atmospheres of Earth-sized exoplanets around sun-like stars. And this telescope, this future telescope, it is informally called LUVEX. It is called this because prior to the Decadal Survey, there were telescope proposals. One was named LUVOIR and one was named HABEX. So people kind of merged the names and call this future telescope LUVEX, but it's an unofficial name. It'll change in a few years. So a main goal of the telescope is to search for exoplanet life. So it's really exciting for us in astrobiology. And my rotation project, it researches this LUVEX telescope. So the LUVEX telescope, it will require starlight suppression to directly image planets. So you can imagine what the goal is with this telescope is you have a star and a planet, far, far away, light years away, and you want to see the photons reflected off of the planet. And that is really hard because right next to the planet is a very bright star. And that's very bright compared to a dim planet. So you need technology that is capable of suppressing the starlight so you can see the dim planet. And there are a few ways of doing this. The HABEX telescope concept, it proposed suppressing starlight with a star shade, which is shown right here. It is exactly what it sounds like. Basically, you have a telescope and you got this big shade in space, and you can orient them such that the shade blocks the starlight, and then the telescope can look around the shade and see the dim planet. And then the LUVOIR telescope concept, it proposed suppressing starlight with a coronagraph. And this is harder to understand than a star shade. It's basically just a bunch of fancy optics that are inside of the telescope that use destructive interference to cancel out the starlight. So the focus of this talk is coronagraph technology for the future LUVEX telescope. We actually don't know for sure if this future telescope will involve a coronagraph or a star shade or both, but I'm focusing on coronagraph telescopes for LUVEX. So here is the modern Earth in reflected light. On the x-axis is wavelength of light in microns. So we have 0.2 microns all the way to 2 microns. And on the y-axis is the planet to star flux ratio. So the values here are of order of 10 to the minus 10. So that means that the planet is about 10 billion times dimmer than the star. And this spectra is just, it's all the wiggles in it are caused by gases in Earth's atmosphere, the changes in surface reflectivity, and also clouds. And so the goal of this future LOVEX telescope is to observe this entire spectrum from 0.2 to 2 microns. In order to do that with a coronagraph, you need 3 coronagraphs. You need a UV coronagraph that observes between 0.2 and 0.5 microns, a visible coronagraph that observes between 0.5 and about 1 microns, and then a near-infrared coronagraph that observes beyond 1 micron. And so then additionally, within each of these coronagraphs, the coronagraph can't observe the entire wavelength range. So for example, the visible coronagraph, it can't observe between 0.5 and 1 microns in one go. It can only observe in small band passes at a time. So the band passes are shown by the vertical dotted lines. So for example, in the visible coronagraph, at one moment in time, it could observe between 0.6 and 0.7 microns, this band pass here. And then at a later point in time, it could collect more data between 0.7 and 0.83 microns, this band pass here. So the ideas with LOVEX, with the coronagraph, is that you can make many sequential observations in different band passes to build up the entire spectrum of Earth, or of an exo-Earth. So this is really important. You can't just take the whole spectrum in one go. You can only do one band pass at a time. So that means that there is some optimal succession of measurements to make, right, to characterize a planet. So I also had the opportunity to sit in on a lot of meetings where people were actually studying coronagraph technology. And I didn't understand a lot of what was said because it's complicated optics. But I got some general vibes of the state of the technology. So for visible coronagraphs, it sounds like the technology is really well developed. And I think that's in large part because there's another telescope called W-FIRST that is going to have a visible coronagraph. So, and that's going to launch relatively soon. So the technology has been developed for quite some time for a visible coronagraph. For the near-infrared coronagraph, it sounds like the technology is sort of developed, but less well developed than the visible coronagraph. And then for the UV coronagraph, the technology is pretty poorly developed. There haven't been a lot of lab experiments that have investigated UV coronagraphs. But that's okay, because LOVEX actually isn't supposed to launch until 2045, so we have time to figure that out. So now we move on to the strategy for finding exoplanet life, as it was written in the LOUVOIR final report. So there's two phases of operations, telescope operations, that was proposed in the LOUVOIR final report. Phase 1 is detect exo-Earth candidates. So first you detect a planet in the habitable zone, and then next you detect water vapor in the planet's atmosphere with a single spectroscopy band pass between 0.83 and 1 microns. So then in phase 1, you have this big collection of exo-Earth candidates. And then in phase 2, you do in-depth observations of all those exo-Earth candidates. You pour a bunch of telescope time into those candidates and see if they're like Earth, see if they're habitable, or if they're even inhabited. So this talk, it focuses on phase 1. It focuses on detecting exo-Earth candidates. I'm interested in, or for my rotation, I was interested in what is the first data that we should take with the LOVEX telescope that would tell us a lot about a planet and whether it's worthy of further characterization in phase 2. So this is what the data might look like after we have detected an exo-Earth candidate at the end of phase 1. Oh, you can't see some of this stuff, but oh well. So basically, this is a modern Earth in reflected light, and we have some shading indicating the effect that different molecules have on the atmosphere. So like blue is water vapor feature, red is an oxygen feature, purple is an ozone feature. And the data might look like something like this. So you have one photometry data point between 0.5 and 0.6 microns. That's used to just detect the planet, see that there's actually something there. And then you have the spectroscopy bandpass between 0.83 and 1 microns that's used to detect water vapor here. You can see this big water vapor feature. So can we do more with this data than just detect water vapor? Can we detect any biosignatures? So here's the data of interest. It looks like for the modern Earth, we can't. There's just a water vapor feature for the modern Earth. But of course, Earth has changed a lot through time, Earth's atmosphere. And its composition has changed a lot through time. So here we have Earth's atmosphere over 4.5 billion years history. And in particular, between 4 and 2.5 billion years ago, there's the Archean eon. And there was a fair bit of methane in the atmosphere back then. And that methane was produced by life. It was produced by methanogens. And so what would this atmosphere look like, the early Earth atmosphere look like in reflected light? It would look something like this. So here I've plotted a few different spectra for different methane concentrations. We don't know the exact methane concentration on the Archean Earth. These are plausible values. So we got 1% all the way down to 0.05%. So then we can overlay, you can't really see it, but you can overlay the same bandpass that was proposed in the Louvois report to detect water vapor. And there's actually a big methane feature you can see in the same spectroscopy bandpass. So this motivates my first research question that I tackled during my rotation. I wanted to know what data quality is required to detect Archean methane during the LUVEC search for water vapor. And so what do I mean by data quality? There's two relevant parameters. There's the spectral resolution, which is how far apart the data points are spaced. High spectral resolution means you have lots of data points as a function of wavelength. Low spectral resolution means they're very spaced apart quite a bit. And there's also the signal to noise ratio. In other words, how big is the error bars? So what resolution and what signal to noise ratio do you need to detect Archean methane in this bandpass? To investigate this, I needed to understand how people calculated detection significance for atmospheric gases. So I'm going to give you a little lesson on that right now. Method 1 for calculating detection significance of a gas from a spectra is called the chi-squared goodness of fit test with 1 degree of freedom. This was a method that was actually used some in the Louvois report. So here we have a spectra of the Archean Earth. It's got 0.1% methane in it. And this is the spectrum. It's in the same bandpass of interest between 0.83 and 1 microns. Here I'm just putting some fake data with some synthetic data with some error bars. And then we can also plot the same spectrum, but take all the methane out of the atmosphere. And so what this chi-squared goodness of fit test says is we can compare the atmosphere without any methane in it to the data points here. And by doing that, you can compute the detection significance of methane. And in this case, you get a 4 sigma methane detection when you compare this red line here to the data points. But there's a problem with this method. The method assumes that we know everything about the planet except the methane concentration. But during the search for exo-Earth candidates with LUVEX, we will know almost nothing about the planet. So things we will not know. We will not know the concentration of any atmospheric gas, the surface pressure, atmospheric temperature, planet radius, the list goes on. We will just know that there is a shiny thing that is next to a star that is probably a planet. So the key thing here is that a spectral feature, it might be well explained by plausible values of other uncertain parameters. So our uncertainty about the planet as a whole could plague our ability to just detect methane. So that leads to method number 2, called Bayesian model comparison. This method accounts for our overall uncertainty in the state of the planet. But before I can explain this method, I have to explain Bayesian atmospheric retrieval because it's required for this method number 2. So very briefly, Bayesian atmospheric retrieval is the process of estimating probability distributions of planetary parameters given a measured spectrum of a planet. So you've got a spectrum of a planet, You want to know its radius, its mass, the composition of its gases. Bayesian retrieval is the process of taking that data and trying to estimate those parameters, the probability distributions for those parameters. So here's one result. I had some data and I did a Bayesian retrieval for the methane concentration in the atmosphere. And I got this distribution here. So this is log 10 methane mixing ratio. And it's centered about the true value in the atmosphere, which is the vertical line here. Back to method 2, Bayesian model comparison. So there's a few steps. Step 1 is to do Bayesian retrieval that infers values for all unknown planetary parameters. So I did that here. We have some spectrum, we have some data points here, and then we have the retrieval posterior, which is all the blue lines. These are samples from the retrieval posterior. Okay, step 2, do another retrieval that infers values for all parameters except the methane concentration. That's what I've done here. I've taken out the option of methane being in the atmosphere. And then I've done the retrieval. It involves many different parameters like planet radius, planet mass, surface pressure, etc. So here is where the methane feature is that we're trying to detect. And you can see that the retrieval with methane, the posterior fits the data point slightly better because methane is permitted in the atmosphere. Here's the retrieval without methane. It fits the data points slightly worse because methane isn't an option. But it still sort of makes its way through all the error bars. And so in this case, we can then compare the two retrievals to compute the detection significance of methane. So in this case, we just get a 1 sigma methane detection because the posterior kind of goes through all the error bars. And that pans out when we look at the methane posterior. So it's a very broad posterior. The methane concentration could really be anything. So we can just do another case with better data, so smaller error bars. And here's the retrieval with methane over here. The posterior goes through all the data points very nicely. And here's the retrieval without methane. And you can see that there's quite a gap between the data points and the posterior. So in this case, with the better data, we get a 4 sigma methane detection. So very high confidence that there's methane in the atmosphere. And that's sort of reflected when we look at the methane posterior. There's a tight distribution about the true value. So let's rewind to my first research question. What data quality is required to detect Archean methane during the Luvex search for water vapor? So I'm interested in this particular bandpass right here. So I used Bayesian model comparison, the method I just told you about, to address this research question. And to do this, I needed a radiative transfer model. So I needed a model of how light passes through gases and atmospheres. I used Ty Robbins' radiative transfer model called RFAST. I made some changes. I made the radiative transfer faster, and I implemented a different way of doing Bayesian retrieval called nested sampling that sped up retrievals. So here are the results. This is the detectability of Archean methane in the 0.83 to 1 micron bandpass. So on the x-axis is the signal to noise ratio. So small signal to noise ratio 5. That means big error bars. Big signal to noise ratio 20. We got really tiny error bars. On the y-axis is the detection significance of methane. And I'm plotting different concentrations of methane in Archean atmospheres. So blue line is 1% methane in the atmosphere, all the way down to the red line, which is 0.05% methane. And so turns out for methane, at about 0.5% concentration or bigger, you can pretty much detect it, even with signal to noise ratio down to about 5, because you're going to get bigger than 3 sigma confidence with signal to noise ratio at 5. And then for methane smaller than maybe 0.1% concentration, it's not detectable at all. So Archean methane could possibly be detectable, depending on what the value, how much methane was in the Archean atmosphere. So there's a problem with all the results I just showed you. So far I have assumed that the synthetic data lie exactly on the true spectrum, but this isn't the case in practice. So you can see that all these data points, they are centered on truth, but that's not how data works. Data is random. It does something like that, or like that, or like that. And so there's actually many different noise realizations that could occur when you're taking data. And so you need to account this in these sorts of detectability studies. You need to do many of these calculations for different realizations of noise. And so that's what I've done here. The same plot you saw before, but I'm giving you the shading, which is the 2 sigma uncertainty of the detection significance that is caused by different random noise realizations of data. And broadly speaking, you get the same sort of qualitative results. Perhaps you would want slightly better data because, with a poor noise realization, you may not be able to detect 0.5% methane if your signal to noise ratio is 5 or around there. So far, I have shown the detectability of Archean methane in a single bandpass between 0.83 and 1 microns. But these results, they do not address the Earth throughout all of time and the detectability of other gases, right? There's the Proterozoic Earth, and there's the modern Earth as well. And there's all these other gases, water vapor, CO2, etc. And so in the last part of my rotation, I extended my study to the detectability of methane, oxygen, and also water vapor in many different bandpasses on Earth throughout all of time. So I considered all these bandpasses you can see above the plot, and I looked at the Archean, Proterozoic, and modern Earth. I'm not going to tell you the details. I'm going to jump straight to the results, or the summary. So the summary is that there are 2 bandpasses and data qualities that I think could be used to detect exo-Earth candidates. They would give you a lot of information about a planet with just a small amount of observation. So the first bandpass is the one in orange that okay. It's the one in orange that I was talking about. So it's between 0.83 and 1 microns. So if you have a data quality, spectral resolution of 140, a signal to noise ratio of 10, then you're going to be able to detect water vapor on Earth throughout all history, and you'll detect Archean methane if the concentration is bigger than 0.5%. The other bandpass that could be used to detect exo-Earth candidates is this one in blue, between 0.7 and 0.83 microns, with a resolution of 140 and a signal to noise ratio of 20. You could probably detect water vapor on Earth throughout all time. You could detect modern Earth oxygen, and you could detect Archean methane if it's bigger than 0.5% in concentration. So the idea is, or hopefully that these kinds of calculations, they can help inform LUVEC's design and the observing strategy. So hopefully they will inform the first sorts of observations that LUVEC makes to see if a planet is interesting and worthy of further observations or not. So that's all the science I have for you. We're moving to some pictures. This is where I worked. This is, I worked right here at this desk, at this wonderful window. Goddard campus itself is actually really pretty. I work with these people, Thomas, Jamie, Sandra. Everybody takes a picture here. So if you go to Goddard, take a picture here. You'll know what I mean. You'll see it. And I went on a lot of runs and bike rides on the Potomac River and saw a lot of turtles. And this is the smallest turtle I saw. So I'm going to just leave you with that. And thanks for listening.
Okay, questions for Nick? Got 5 minutes. Yep, Rudy.
On your slide with the shading, because you added in all the extra noise on your kind of like summary plot with the methane, the different percentages. For this one, the kind of like segment right before this, where it was just methane. Yeah, this one. Why is it that when you are adding noise to your models about the data, it like almost seems to increase the detectability of the like 0.1% methane and 0.05% methane?
Well, I mean, there is a possibility that you get a random noise realization that makes it look like there's methane when there isn't.
Like if this is your true and this is your methane, but your noise is scattered around your true, it might be down here.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could get, yeah, it could look like when there's methane if, if there's not, if you have a weird noise realization.
Other questions?
Oh,
Josh. Yeah, to go back to you had your rule in mind that. I was wondering. Like, so you have to have good signals to use the word, right? But what does that translate to in terms of duration time? So you have more photons there, was it better to just use the blue potentially? Because you get more molecular detections or?
yeah, so it's actually like a complicated thing because. Oh, yeah, so the question is, I mean, the question is essentially that you like, why would you use the blue or why would you use the orange? Because the blue takes a lot more or a lot higher signal to noise ratio. Is that the essentially? Well, I guess there's just other considerations. So there's this whole other thing about inner working angle, outer working angle. That's jargon, but basically depending on the planet, you're going to have challenges observing at particular wavelengths. And so for initial characterizations of planets, they want to have the possibility of observing different band passes at different wavelengths because you could actually have limitations depending on the geometry of where the planet is at a time of observation. So it's good to have a shorter wavelength one and a longer wavelength one, depending on the geometry of the planet in its orbit.
Also with the blue one, you get oxygen as well as methane, right? Because you see the oxygen red bands.
Yeah, yeah. But it's harder to detect water vapor because the water vapor features are smaller. So.
Other questions?
Yeah, Lupita's question is, I might have missed it, but how much time would you need on the telescope to detect 0.5% methane and or to build up that SNR needed? You did not miss it. I talked about time at no point. Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly that's something I did not look at in my rotation at all, is like to get this signal to noise ratio, how much time does it take? Part of the reason is because, they're still kind of working out, like, it depends on how far away a planet is, the albedo of the planet, also, the size of the planet. So I guess you would have to assume very particular scenario. But yeah, that's something I didn't look at, but other folks are doing that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Other questions? So why did you use 3 sigma as your gold standard? Why not 4 sigma? Why not 2 sigma? 2 sigma social science.
In reality, right, it's not, I don't know, I don't see it as a gold standard, but everybody else was talking in terms of 3 sigma. So I was like, I'll talk in terms of 3 sigma.
Okay, that's 99.7% instead of 95% 2 sigma.
Yeah.
It's very stringent.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yep.
You have a greater than 2 sigma chance of seeing that methane band. Could you actually constrain it at 0.5%, or like how easy is it to get out the concentration, or are you simply saying yes, there's this detectable methane in the sand?
So the question is, how easy is it to get out the concentration of methane if it's 0.5%, for example, in one of these bands? It's gonna, you're gonna be able, if it's you're gonna get a concentration. In any of these cases, if you're detecting, it basically implies a minimum concentration, right? Because it means that there's something there. But during atmospheric retrieval, you will end up with a probability distribution for the methane. So you'll have range of possible values. Yeah.
Okay, well, the buzzer just went, so your time is up. But let's thank Nick again.